Chris, and he would have introduced you to this a little bit already. How many of you know anything about solo taxonomy? Okay, that's not too bad. I'm not going to explain it all in lots of detail to you. I'm going to try and just talk about how it made me think about my subject in a slightly different way. Do I just press the button? How does this work?
Is it a PowerPoint? Yeah, just press the button. The other button.
Okay, so my question was how to use this in art. This is a diagram which represents the solo taxonomy. It should make a bit more sense as I start to talk about it, but I don't want to just explain this because that would be 7 minutes gone. So what I started to think about, it's a way of classifying the level of thinking. It's like Bloom's taxonomy in the fact that you can think about something quite simple like describing, and you can think about something quite complex like creating, and put them on a sort of spectrum. And I'll come back to that. So I started to think about what these different things would represent in art. So what does each strand or outcome actually mean, and what would the connections be that would allow something a little bit more complicated to happen? So this is what first sprung to mind, and it was what we do in art, which is called deconstructing or analysing artworks, which is quite important for kids to be able to do to create their own work as well. So you start off by describing what you see. Say we're all looking at an artwork, so you start off by just describing what you see. Then you move on to describing the formal elements that you see, so that would be things like line, colour, shape and form. And that obviously takes a little bit more of a background knowledge for the kids to have before they can do that. The next thing they would do would be to describe the impact of those formal elements. So if colours are bright, if they're vivid, what effects that have on the viewer in comparison to something dull or a bit more depressing. And then the last one, which I think is quite a step on, and I think it's quite interesting looking at this in spectrum, because for me, there's a big jump between being able to see something and recognise it to being able to actually interpret it or come up with something new. And that's the last step there. So interpreting, understanding, or speculating about meaning of artwork. And I think, again, for anybody who's ever been to contemporary art galleries, the meaning of artwork can sometimes be quite difficult to get your head around, especially for kids. And part of my job is making them understand that they have some way that they can at least try to do that, or some kind of path they can follow. And that's where this becomes quite useful. So I was thinking about this solo taxonomy thing. I was thinking about Bloom's taxonomy that we're quite familiar with in art. And I was thinking, it's not really anything new. We do this already, and this is an example of a resource that we use with kids to deconstruct images in photography. And as you can see, it says our first step is just describe what you see. The second step is describe the formal element. The third is reading or interpret the image. And we always give them resources that make sure that they have all of those building blocks. So the formal elements are quite clearly described to them. They know these things. They can use those to help to start to come up with their own understanding. So, if solo taxonomy is nothing new to me, if it's just like Bloom's taxonomy, why am I standing here talking about it? Why was I even thinking about it? And for anyone who's looked at solo, for me it was in this visual, and that's why I keep coming back to it, this kind of diagram that's here. Not only was I just thinking about what the strands actually meant, but I started really thinking about this final one, which is called extended abstract, for anyone who's met solo taxonomy before. But for me, I'm going to move away from the mic because I kind of feel like I need to point at it. There's these steps, there's the describing, there's the kind of making connections between, and then there's this. And this little top bit of the diagram, to me, kind of represents something special that happens, something kind of magic that grows out of something that you follow in a little bit more of a kind of regular way. I'm describing something, I'm recognizing things, and then something that happens. And for art teachers, that's the exciting bit, and that's the difficult bit as well. It's a hard nut to crack, how you get kids to actually be creative and come up with their own ideas for artworks. So I started getting excited about solo taxonomy because I thought, is this a way that we can actually get kids to come up with better ideas? Not just be confident in reading artworks, but actually have good ideas. Because you can teach them all kinds of things, but you can't teach how to have an idea. So I decided then, I got really excited, and I started thinking about art as actually being an amazing example of extended abstract level thinking, how you have to be able to make lots of connections between things, get quite carried away with an idea before you start then thinking, I'm going to express this, not through words, but through a visual way of expressing, which is what art is. then started thinking again about this kind of linear process of how you start and you kind of describe and then you move along. And I started thinking, is the creative process a linear one? Has it ever been a linear one? Can we make it linear? And so I was saying, is it as simple as line, form and colour, or formal elements, plus connecting ideas equals artwork? Does that happen? Is it that straightforward? Or is it something more like line, form and colour, plus connecting ideas, plus a little bit of magic equals art? Okay, and I think most of you would sort of think, oh yeah, it's sort of the second one, but what do we do with that? How can we kind of harness this idea that it's something a little bit magic with what we do?
1 minute, Naomi.
Okay, alright. So it reminded me of a project that I did with some Year 13 students that we took to the Baltic, where they actually were asked to try and visualise the creative process. We said, is it linear? You know, if you look at a sketchbook of a kid, it starts at the beginning, and at the end you're meant to have, and this is my final idea. Is that how it works? And they all said, well, no, that's not how it works. And we go back and forward, and sometimes we get to this stage, and then we think, no, that's not quite right, so we come back and we revisit it here. So this is what one student actually made. It's this beautiful piece of artwork where she made all these, she painted all these strands, and then just wove them into each other, and made this fantastic kind of three-dimensional thing that came off the wall. And I think it's just a lovely way of sort of showing how complicated that process is and how it can't necessarily be seen as a linear process. So that's just the exhibition that was in Baltic of the work that the kids did where they were visualising the creative process. So, I'm asking lots of questions here. I'm not trying to present any answers. I'm not trying to say I've got this sussed or figured it out. But what I really wanted just to tell you about was how looking at this different way of thinking made me engage with my subject in a slightly different way, made me think about things differently. So I've come up with some questions that are the key questions for me from this whole exercise. So the first one there is, how can we use the solo taxonomy to help students to see works of art as examples of extended abstract and beyond? You know, is there more than that? Level thinking, and give them the confidence that they can unlock meaning in artwork. That's quite important to me. Kids who are looking at artwork say, how am I meant to know what that means? I can't do this. So to give them a process to follow. How can we use the solo taxonomy in art to help students evaluate their ideas in terms of creative sophistication? Can we get them to see, this is a good idea, this is a really good idea, that's an idea but not so good? Because again, these things are quite difficult to find your way through for kids. And these, for me, are the two biggies, the two big ones. Can we actually use solo taxonomy to help students to actually be creative? And can we use solo to help students to form their own increasingly sophisticated ideas for creative expression? Because that's at the very centre of what we're trying to do in art, and it's quite tricky. So this has been exciting for me because potentially it's a new way of doing it. So that's all I can really say, is hopefully sometime I'll have some more answers to give people or more questions to ask.